Imagine a world where I could walk up to you, take a fifth of some miscellaneous liquor, let's say vodka, and smash it over your head. If you were a Sigma Chi at the University of South Carolina circa spring 2016, this probably was actually a reality for you. But what if there were no repercussions? Because to me, this was morally okay. Does that mean it's acceptable to do so, just because I think it is? Through the exploration of various reasons for believing in moral relativism and moral absolutism, and in the end, everything is relative to each person, and therefore, it is hard to say what ought to be for everyone. Looking first to moral relativism, we can see multiple arguments across time that show viewing morals in a relativistic manner have aided in our survival as a species. So, looking first to moral relativism, the first argument we can see is that of cultural relativism. What a culture values varies from culture to culture. What is deemed to be correct in a culture is subjective to only that individual culture, while there may be some overlap, every culture is slightly different. And then these beliefs can vary inside a subculture and as different cultures begin to form. So let's take a look at this. When first looking to a classic example, it's one of Nazi Germany, sub-1930s, 1940s. And in this culture, the killing of anyone who was deemed to be non-Aryan was considered permissible. In most cultures, murdering someone in cold blood is generally not seen as moral and it's an unethical practice. However, in this time period and within this culture, this was something that was seen as okay. And then as we take a look even farther, even within this culture, we can see subcultures that form. So let's take a look to one that's a little more familiar to us, and that is the American culture, particularly the pro-life, pro-choice battle. In the American culture, these two peoples are two types of subgroups that form. One is the pro-life culture. It believes that life begins at conception and that all babies should be kept and not aborted. The pro-choice culture believes that it is the mother's choice, or whoever the party involves choice, whether or not the infant or the fetus should be able to live. And within this culture, we can see sort of that they both are part of the American culture. However, there are different sects and divisions that make them up. So the next argument for moral relativism is that of the argument for tolerance. And this says that we ought to be tolerant, and that moral absolutism is intolerant while moral relativism is tolerant. Therefore, we ought to be moral relativists. Well, being tolerant of those around you is the right thing to do because everyone is deserving of their own opinions and thoughts. By being morally relative, you are allowing others to express themselves however they see fit. From this standpoint, you would hope that others would be moral relativists because that would allow you and them to sort of coexist in a better manner. If they were more tolerant of what you thought and you were more tolerant of what they thought, this could spur and facilitate new ways of thinking and would only allow you to get better as a culture. And another argument is that what is morally relative to you may be offensive to someone else. Therefore, you would want to be tolerant of your own beliefs. By passing this forwards and sort of thinking it from a sort of a dual perspective, you can see that if you are tolerant of someone else's point of view and they are tolerant towards your point of view, it's only better for seeing eye to eye and you're able to connect with people more. And even if someone is an absolutist, then they will not be able to look at your own beliefs from your own point of view, and they'll have a harder time of understanding who you are in general. And the third argument is the argument for evolution. And this says that traditional morality, broadly construed, cooperation and altruism is necessary for biological survival. Therefore, we ought to cooperate altruistically. Therefore, morality is relative to what enables one to survive. And so although morality is relative to a culture and the survival of that culture, by selectively picking who we want in our society and our lives, we are better fitting ourselves for survival and thus advancing our chances to live longer and pass our genetic code. If you take a little further at this, you can take a look and see that prehistoric cultures would look for the strongest mates to survive. And although this was acting in a selfish way, it was also altruistic in the sense that they were hoping that having stronger people in their crowd or in their herd or in their tribe would allow everyone to survive rather than just themselves. And being morally relative to an individual helps the individual to survive, which is the key drive of every single organism. And by acting accordingly to how you believe, this is maximizing your own personal chances of survival rather than for a society. In the end, this is what's most important to you, and you may as well do so. You should maximize how you survive, and by this, you are being a moral relativist because you're seeing it from your own point of view. Looking now to the arguments towards moral absolutism, there are a few different facets which we have to look at. The first argument is for that of tradition. So let's take a look at how this sort of breaks down. It is an indicator of a true moral theory is that it should attract people throughout generations, i.e. there should be popular moral tradition. Throughout history, generation after generation, most people have been moral absolutists. And even in contemporary society, most people are likewise absolutists. Therefore, moral absolutism is more likely than the true moral theory. So throughout history, we have a code of law which we have established throughout pretty much all societies that people have followed. By setting up these beliefs and these laws early on, we have formed and learned how to live together in a society and cooperate towards the good of everyone. Because of this, we've been able to advance rather than living in these nomadic tribes in which people jumped from location to location, sort of doing as they pleased. And it has allowed us to sort of get behind this belief system, come together as a society. And so, a couple examples I have of this I picked up throughout my travels is here I have a mini statue of Siddhartha Gautama, or the Buddha. And so, since I've spent a lot of time in Asia, I find it interesting that Buddhism is a key belief that has held together our society, even here, where I've traveled to Cambodia, which I have my snow globe. It is of Angkor Wat, which is a Hindu site. These religions have glued together these nations for hundreds and thousands of years. Buddhism, which has been around, and so is Hinduism for a couple thousand years, have allowed these societies to form moral codes and to live together as one. And even though sometimes there are clashes between them, they share these common beliefs, which has only advanced their cause as a nation and a people. In addition to this, societies are morally absolute in their views. This is how laws are set up. We have a code of laws in order for everyone to follow them, and for people who defy them to be punished because of it. We all share these sort of unique and interesting moral beliefs that when we come together, this forms our society. And although people can defy them, and the concept of murder still exists, there are punishments set in place to sort of counteract this. The next argument is the absolutist in practice argument, and this says that a moral theory ought to be practically livable. Therefore, a true moral theory is one that is livable. Moral relativism is not a livable theory. Moral absolutism is a livable theory. Therefore, moral absolutism is a true moral theory. So let's just delve into this a little bit. Living morally absolute is a more stable theory and provides more stability to a society in general. Going back to what I said a minute ago, this is how laws were formed and this is how societies were allowed to be set up. If everyone is morally relative, then no matter what would happen, we'd all be at arms with each other. My opinion would be different from the person next to me's, and we'd have to there'd be clashes, there'd be conflicts everywhere. But by being an absolutist, you were taking a look at things relative to, let's say, in this sense, it's relative to this culture, and everything is absolute for this one specific culture. A good example of this is the Golden Rule, which can be found across pretty much every culture thus far. And by following the Golden Rule, it is a moral argument that we all try to incorporate into our lives, where do unto others what you want them to do unto you. And we've lived with these views for thousands of years, and it has allowed us to advance as a society, so it's advancing our own survival and aiding in our accomplishments, which ultimately is what I believe to be the purpose of humanity, is to work together and to survive and to reproduce. And being morally absolutist in these laws that we have set up have allowed us to accomplish this. The third argument for moral absolutism is the argument for moral language, and that is, if we are incapable about arguing about moral statements, but only prefer to and argue about feelings and desires, then moral relativism is true. Well, if we are capable of arguing about moral statements, then moral absolutism is true. We are capable of arguing about moral statements, therefore, moral absolutism is true. If you look at some of the arguments about being morally absolute and are capable, and we as a society hold certain values true to each other, and this also goes across cultures. In class and amongst ourselves, we're capable of discussing the moral values, as we've so done with, again, moral relativism and absolutism, and recently with abortion. We've been able to step back and look at it from these different points of view. The universal acknowledgement that morals exist is an acknowledgement that morals in general do, in fact, exist. If we agree that there are morals to talk about, then there must be factual evidence that we can adhere to in a moral code. This has been proven over and over in society as we form laws and codes in order to protect ourselves from those who do not adhere to this belief. Ultimately, after discussing both moral relativism and moral absolutism, we have to take a step back and look at it from a higher level. Moral relativism is true because you can either believe that morals are relative or absolute, but ultimately that value is your own relative belief. Whatever you end up believing, this is your own personal choice. The absolutist would say that the rules apply to everyone, but regardless, the relativist will say that it is relative to you. Because of this, what you hold true is your own personal value, and being morally relative is what actually happens in society. Whether this is what ought to be is ultimately up to the person and the individual themselves. However, because of this, the moral relativism is ultimately what everyone is.